I'm Aiden, 28, and I built my tech empire from nothing after my own parents abandoned me financially. They claimed they couldn't spare $600 for my rent during college, yet somehow found $22,000 to bail out my brother's credit card disaster. Their betrayal fueled my success. The look on my dad's face, when he walked into my company's lobby not knowing I owned the place, was worth every night I spent hungry and cold. Before I tell you how I went from nearly homeless to owning multiple companies, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe if you've ever had family choose favorites. Trust me, my revenge was worth the wait. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father Richard worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company, while my mother Margaret taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom colonial with a well-kept lawn and a 2-car garage, the epitome of middle-class American stability. My younger brother Ethan and I shared the second floor, our rooms connected by a bathroom that became a constant battleground as we grew older. From an early age, the differences between us were stark and seemingly defined our value in our parents' eyes. Ethan was the golden child, athletic, charming, and effortlessly popular. He played 3 sports, excelled at baseball particularly, and had a natural ability to make people laugh. Our parents rarely missed his games, proudly wearing team colors and cheering from the bleachers regardless of the weather. My mother would spend hours preparing special protein-packed meals before his big games, and my father dedicated weekends to practicing pitches with him in the backyard. I, on the other hand, was quiet and studious. Computers fascinated me from the moment my elementary school got its first shared PC lab. While Ethan collected trophies that eventually required their own shelf in the living room, I collected knowledge and skills that were less visible, less celebrated. I taught myself coding at 13, built my first rudimentary program at 14, and by 16 I was fixing computers for neighbors to earn extra cash. The pattern of favoritism was subtle at first, but grew more obvious over time. Christmas mornings told the story clearest. Ethan would unwrap the latest gaming console, expensive sports equipment, or trendy clothes. My gifts were practical socks, educational books, or computer parts I had specifically requested with detailed model numbers, which they often got wrong. When I opened a refurbished laptop one year while Ethan got a brand new dirt bike, my mother justified it with, "You're practical, Aiden. We knew you'd appreciate something useful more than something flashy." Family gatherings amplified the disparity. Relatives would ask Ethan about his latest game-winning play while I sat quietly. When I tried sharing news about winning a regional programming competition, my Aunt Barbara would smile politely before turning to ask Ethan about college scouts. My father would beam with pride introducing Ethan to his colleagues, while I was often an afterthought, "And this is our older son, Aiden. He's good with computers." Despite the obvious favoritism, I channeled my energy into academics. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA throughout high school, scored 1,500 on my SATs, and won the state computer science competition 2 years running. While Ethan struggled to maintain a C average, I was accepted to one of the top computer science programs in the country, with a partial merit scholarship. The night I received my acceptance letter, I rushed downstairs, hands shaking with excitement. My parents were watching television in the living room. I got in, I announced, holding up the letter. Full acceptance with a $15,000 merit scholarship. My mother looked up briefly. "That's nice, honey. We knew you would." My father nodded. "Good job. Make sure you find out about work-study options." That same evening, when Ethan burst through the door announcing he'd been offered a partial baseball scholarship to a state college with an unremarkable academic reputation, my parents leapt to their feet. My mother hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes, while my father clapped him on the back, repeatedly declaring we needed to celebrate. They ordered pizza called Grandparents and opened a bottle of champagne they'd been saving for a special occasion. I retreated to my room, acceptance letter still in hand, the contrast not lost on me. But I told myself it didn't matter. I was going to create my own success story with or without their enthusiasm. Little did I know how literally that promise would be tested. My first semester at university felt like breathing fresh air after years of being suffocated. For once, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language both literally and figuratively. My roommate Jackson was a brilliant mathematics major who appreciated late-night discussions about algorithm efficiency. My professors recognized my abilities and challenged me accordingly. For the first time, I felt truly seen. I'd started college with cautious optimism about my financial situation. My scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, and I'd saved nearly $8,000 from my high school computer repair business. My parents had vaguely promised to help out where they could, though they never committed to specific amounts or expenses. "We're not made of money," Aiden, my father, reminded me during move-in day as we passed families unloading expensive furniture and brand-new laptops. "You'll need to be frugal. This was your choice." I had accepted their limitations and budgeted carefully. My apartment was a 20-minute walk from campus, far enough to be affordable, but close enough to be practical. I shared it with 2 other students to keep costs down. I simply worked weekends at the campus IT help desk and avoided the costly social outings that consumed many of my classmates' bank accounts. Everything changed during my 3rd semester. The university announced budget cuts due to endowment losses, and my scholarship was reduced by 30%. This translated to an additional $4,000 per semester I hadn't planned for. I'd already depleted most of my savings covering books, supplies, and living expenses. After staring at my bank account for hours calculating and recalculating possible scenarios, I swallowed my pride and called home. It was a Sunday evening, and I knew both my parents would be there. "Hey, Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got a bit of a situation with my scholarship." I explained the cuts and my financial predicament. "I've looked at every option," I continued. "I've applied for additional scholarships and taken on more hours at work, but I'm still coming up short. I need about $600 a month for rent until I can find a better solution. Could you and Dad help, just temporarily?" The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before my mother replied, "Oh, Aiden, that's terrible timing. Your father and I are really stretched thin right now. The roof needed repairs, and we've had to help your grandmother with her medication costs." My father got on the phone. "Son, we just don't have extra cash lying around. You're smart. You'll figure something out. Maybe take a semester off to work full-time, or find a cheaper place." I ended the call feeling hollow. Taking a semester off would mean losing my remaining scholarship and possibly my spot in the competitive program. Moving to a cheaper place mid-semester would require breaking my lease, paying penalties I couldn't afford, and likely moving much farther from campus. What followed were the hardest months of my life. I took on a second job stocking shelves at a grocery store from 10 at night until 2 in the morning, then a third delivering newspapers before dawn. I slept in fragmented 3-hour chunks between work classes and assignments. I survived on ramen noodles, the cheapest caloric option available, supplemented with free coffee from the computer lab. I walked everywhere to save bus fare, even in the bitter January snow, because every dollar mattered. My apartment was perpetually cold because I kept the thermostat at 55 degrees to minimize utilities. I studied wrapped in every blanket I owned, wearing gloves with the fingertips cut off so I could still type. One particularly brutal week, I rationed my food so severely that I became dizzy during a programming lab. Professor Winters noticed and discreetly brought me a sandwich from the faculty lounge. "You're one of my most promising students, Aiden," she said quietly, "but you look like you're about to collapse. Is everything all right?" I gave her a sanitized version of my situation, too proud to reveal the depth of my struggles. She listened carefully before suggesting I apply for the department's emergency grant program. That grant, $500, allowed me to eat properly for the remainder of the semester. Despite everything, I maintained my GPA and even developed a simple mobile app that earned me a few $100s in monthly revenue. It wasn't much, but it created a small buffer in my bank account for the first time in months. That Thanksgiving, exhausted but proud of my resilience, I drove my ancient Honda Civic back to Boston for the holiday weekend. The car barely made the journey, the heater failing 2 hours into the drive, forcing me to stop every hour to warm my hands at gas station microwaves. I arrived home to find a gleaming new Ford Mustang in our driveway. My brother emerged from the house as I was retrieving my duffel bag from my trunk. "Like it?" Ethan grinned, gesturing to the car. "Early graduation present from Mom and Dad." They got a great deal from Dad's friend at the dealership. I stared at the vehicle, its metallic paint reflecting the afternoon sun, trying to process how my parents could afford a $30,000 car while claiming they couldn't spare $600 a month to keep me housed. Something inside me cracked, but I forced a smile and congratulated my brother. It wasn't his fault our parents had such different standards for their sons. That weekend, I noticed other signs of financial comfort that contradicted my parents' claims of being stretched thin. New furniture in the living room, my mother's new tablet, golf clubs propped in the corner of the garage. Each observation was another small cut to my already wounded trust. By my senior year, I had achieved a fragile stability. My app was generating enough revenue to cover basic necessities, and I'd secured a prestigious internship that paid well and promised excellent references for future job searches. I was exhausted, but managing, and the finish line was finally in sight. I had largely accepted my parents' inability or unwillingness to help me financially, filing it away as a painful reality, but not one I could change. Christmas break arrived with a heavy snowstorm that nearly prevented my drive home. The thought wasn't entirely unwelcome. Part of me would have preferred staying in my apartment coding in peaceful solitude, rather than navigating the emotional minefield of family gatherings. But some stubborn part of me still craved that normal family Christmas experience, still hoped for genuine connection with the people who had raised me. The house was decked in holiday decorations when I arrived, a fire crackling in the fireplace, and the scent of my mother's sugar cookies filling the air. Ethan had arrived the day before, having dropped out of college. After 3 unsuccessful years despite his scholarship, he was finding himself, which seemed to involve sleeping until noon, and playing video games for hours on end. My parents appeared to accept this phase with patient indulgence. My first night home, I woke around midnight, thirsty after the long drive. As I approached the kitchen, I heard my parents' voices in heated discussion. I paused in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop, until I heard my name. "We can't tell Aiden about this," my mother was saying. "You know how he gets about money, always keeping track of every penny. He'd never understand." "I don't like hiding things from him," my father replied. "But you're right. He's always been so independent, so responsible. Ethan needs this help more than Aiden ever has." $22,000, Richard. It's a fortune. If we hadn't taken that equity line on the house. I froze, my body suddenly cold despite the house's warmth. The credit card companies were threatening legal action, Margaret. What choice did we have? Ethan made mistakes, but he deserves a fresh start. The financial counselor said clearing his debt was the only way forward. I know. I just hope we did the right thing. I retreated silently to my room. My thirst, forgotten as a different kind of hunger, consumed me, the need for answers, for justification, for some explanation that could make sense of this revelation. $22,000. The sum reverberated in my mind as I lay sleepless. $22,000 would have covered my rent for 3 years. It would have prevented countless nights of hunger, cold, and exhaustion. It would have allowed me to focus on my studies instead of working until my body gave out. And my parents had it all along, or at least they had access to it through their home equity. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table observing my family through new eyes. My mother bustled around making pancakes, Ethan's favorite. My father read the newspaper, occasionally commenting on headlines. Ethan scrolled through his phone, yawning dramatically. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that now felt like an elaborate facade. I waited until we were all seated, food served, before I spoke. "I heard something interesting last night." I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Something about $22,000. The kitchen went silent. My father's newspaper lowered slowly. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Ethan looked confused, glancing between our parents. "You weren't meant to hear that," my father finally said. "Clearly not. But I did. You paid off Ethan's credit card debt. $22,000 worth." My mother's expression hardened slightly. "Aiden, you don't understand the whole situation. Your brother made some mistakes, but he needs a fresh start. The debt was crushing him." "Crushing him," I repeated. While I was literally counting pennies for ramen, while I was working 3 jobs and still barely making rent, while I was walking miles in snow because I couldn't afford bus fare. "That's different," my father interjected. "You've always been responsible. You've always figured things out. So, I'm punished for being responsible. Ethan racks up massive debt on frivolous purchases, and he gets a clean slate." My mother reached across the table. "Honey, you're the smart one. You've always been self-sufficient. We knew you'd be fine." "Fine." My voice cracked. I almost dropped out because I couldn't afford to live. "I've been hungry, cold, exhausted for years while you've been bailing Ethan out. And you had the audacity to tell me you were stretched thin when I asked for $600 a month. $600. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Dude, I didn't know you were struggling that bad." "Of course you didn't. No one in this family has ever bothered to ask." I pushed back from the table. "I'm not hungry anymore." The remainder of Christmas break was tense and stilted. My parents attempted weak justifications that only deepened my sense of betrayal. "We thought you'd refuse help anyway. You seem to be managing. Your brother isn't as capable as you are." Each excuse was another twist of the knife. The breaking point came 3 days before I was due to return to campus. We were watching television in strained silence when Ethan casually mentioned his plans for spring break. "Mom and Dad are helping me book that Europe trip we talked about," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Gonna be epic." I looked at my parents, who had the decency to appear uncomfortable but didn't contradict him. Something final snapped inside me. I stood without a word and went upstairs to pack my things. As I threw clothes into my duffel bag, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would finish my degree relying on no one but myself, and then I would disappear from their lives as completely as they had disappeared from mine when I needed them most. I left before dawn the next morning, leaving only a brief note. "Going back early. Need to prepare for final semester." The drive back to campus was 18 hours of crystallizing resolve, each mile putting distance between me and the family that had failed me so completely. Back on campus with a newfound clarity, I channeled my hurt and anger into strategic planning. My final semester would be crucial, not just academically, but as the foundation for my complete independence. I needed a job that would support me immediately after graduation, one that wouldn't tie me to a specific location or make me easily findable. I focused my job search exclusively on remote positions with tech startups. These companies valued skills over credentials and offered flexibility that traditional corporations couldn't match. I updated my portfolio with projects I'd completed during sleepless nights, polished my resume, and practiced interview questions between classes. After 17 applications and 12 interviews, I received an offer from a promising San Francisco startup developing data analytics tools. The salary was modest by tech standards, but more than enough for my needs, and critically, it was fully remote. I accepted immediately, negotiating a start date 2 weeks after graduation. I told no one about my plans, not my roommates, not my professors, not the few friends I'd made during my time at university. I knew that maintaining connections meant potential leaks of information back to my family. Complete severance required complete secrecy. My graduation ceremony arrived on a bright May morning. The auditorium was filled with proud families cheering as their children crossed the stage. My row was particularly enthusiastic parents, standing and whistling as each name was called. When Aidan Sullivan echoed through the speakers, the audience applauded politely, the generic recognition given to students whose families weren't present. I hadn't invited my parents, hadn't even told them the date. As I accepted my diploma, I scanned the crowd briefly, half expecting to see them despite my silence. They weren't there, confirming what I already knew: the severance was mutual. After the ceremony, I returned to my apartment for the last time. I had already sorted my possessions into 3 categories: necessities to keep, items to sell, and things to donate. My life fit into 4 boxes and 2 suitcases, a minimalist existence born of necessity, and now embraced by choice. I made my final rental payment, cleaned the apartment meticulously to ensure the return of my security deposit, and loaded everything into my car. Before leaving town, I completed my digital disappearance, changing my phone number, creating a new email address that bore no resemblance to my previous one, and deactivating all social media accounts. I opened a new bank account at a national chain, transferring my modest savings and closing my university area account. My destination was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city reinventing itself as a tech hub with a cost of living low enough to stretch my entry-level salary. I had researched neighborhoods, carefully selecting a small but secure apartment in a converted factory building. The exposed brick and industrial windows appealed to my practical aesthetic, and the building's secure entry system provided peace of mind. Those first months of self-imposed isolation were among the most challenging and most productive of my life. I worked my regular hours for the startup, quickly proving my value as I resolved persistent bugs and optimized systems that had troubled more experienced developers. Evenings and weekends were devoted to my own project, a proprietary software designed to automate content analysis for marketing teams. Human connection was scarce. I spoke with colleagues through Slack and occasional video calls, but maintained professional distance. My neighbors nodded in hallways but respected the privacy that seemed to emanate from me like a force field. I ate alone, worked alone, slept alone, building a fortress of solitude that protected me from further hurt but also prevented healing. 3 months after my disappearance, my mother attempted contact. Somehow she had obtained my work email, likely through the university alumni office. Her message was brief. "Aiden, we haven't heard from you since you left. Please let us know you're okay. Love, Mom." I stared at it for 20 minutes before archiving it without reply. The word love felt like a foreign language I no longer understood. As my first year of self-imposed exile progressed, my financial situation improved steadily. I lived frugally out of habit, investing most of my income back into development tools for my side project. My bank account grew first to 5 figures, then approaching 6, a cushion of security I had never known before. Gradually, I allowed a few selective connections. A colleague named Marcus invited me to a weekend hackathon, and something about his straightforward manner broke through my defenses. We became tentative friends, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss coding challenges or industry trends. Through him, I met Teresa, a brilliant UI designer whose perspective complemented my technical focus. These small openings in my emotional armor coincided with my first recognition that isolation had taken a psychological toll. I began waking at 3 in the morning, heart racing with undefined anxiety. Memories of family holidays would ambush me in grocery stores or laundromats, leaving me momentarily paralyzed. After one particularly bad week of insomnia, I found a therapist who specialized in family estrangement. Dr. Catherine Chen never pressured me to reconcile with my family or to forgive before I was ready. Instead, she helped me untangle the complex web of love, betrayal, anger, and grief that defined my relationship with my parents and brother. Healing doesn't require reconnection, she told me during one pivotal session, but it does require reconnecting with parts of yourself that were damaged by their actions. By my second year of independence, my side project had evolved into a viable product. I filed patents, incorporated a small business, and began approaching potential clients. My first sale to a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago validated both my technical vision and business model. The second and third sales followed quickly, creating enough revenue for me to consider leaving my steady job. I submitted my resignation with mixed emotions. The startup had been my lifeline when I needed it most, but my creation demanded my full attention. My supervisor tried to keep me with promises of promotion and equity, but my decision was made. For the first time in my life, I was completely self-determining, answerable to no one. That night, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by the gentle glow of computer monitors, I allowed myself a moment of pride. From the desperate college student counting pennies for ramen, I had transformed into a business owner with growing success and unlimited potential. The fortress I had built to protect myself was becoming a launchpad instead. 2 years after graduation, with my first company generating stable revenue, I made the decision to expand operations. My content analysis software had found its market niche, attracting clients ranging from small marketing agencies to multinational corporations. Working from my Pittsburgh apartment had served me well during the bootstrap phase, but to truly scale, I needed a proper office and a team. Chicago became my next home base, centrally located with a robust tech ecosystem and more affordable than coastal hubs. I leased a modest office space in the West Loop, an area transforming from industrial wasteland to innovation district. With careful planning and rigorous interviewing, I assembled a core team of 8 developers, designers, and sales specialists who shared my vision for data-driven content optimization. The company, which I named Clearview Analytics, grew faster than even my optimistic projections. Our client list expanded from 20 to over 100 within 18 months. My technical background, combined with an unexpected talent for strategic business development, created a powerful foundation. By the end of our second year in Chicago, we had grown to 50 employees and moved to larger offices overlooking the Chicago River. Our breakthrough came when NetStream, a major digital media conglomerate, approached us about acquisition. Their offer was generous, 8 figures plus stock options, but included terms that would have required me to relinquish control. Instead of accepting outright, I negotiated a partial acquisition that allowed NetStream to license our technology while I retained majority ownership and operational control. This hybrid arrangement provided capital infusion without sacrificing autonomy. With newfound resources, I launched my second venture, a cloud security platform called Fortress Protocol. Cybersecurity had always fascinated me, and my analysis of market trends suggested growing demand for solutions that protected customer data without sacrificing performance. I hired specialists from leading security firms offering equity stakes that aligned their interests with the company's success. Fortress Protocol secured its first major client, a healthcare system, with stringent privacy requirements 6 months after launch. Others followed as our reputation for both security and system efficiency spread through industry channels. We formed strategic partnerships with larger tech companies, becoming their preferred security solution for sensitive implementations. My personal profile remained intentionally low during this period of expansion. I declined speaking engagements, avoided industry networking events when possible, and delegated media interactions to our communications director. When Technology Innovator magazine requested an interview for their Founders to Watch feature, I agreed only if they would use my first name only and no photographs. The resulting article described me as the enigmatic Aiden, whose brilliance is matched only by his reclusiveness. This partial anonymity served both personal and professional purposes. It protected me from potential family contact while creating an aura of mystery that ironically increased interest in my companies. Potential investors and partners were intrigued by the founder who let his work speak for itself rather than seeking the spotlight. My personal wealth grew exponentially as both companies thrived. I purchased a penthouse condominium in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, a glass and steel sanctuary with panoramic lake views. The space was minimalist but luxurious, featuring smart home technology I had customized myself and an office setup that rivaled most corporate headquarters. Despite financial success, I lived relatively modestly compared to other tech entrepreneurs at my level. I drove a high-end electric vehicle, but not an ostentatious sports car. I dined at excellent restaurants, but avoided the scene-making establishments favored by those seeking to be noticed. My few indulgences were technological: the latest development tools, custom-built computers, and prototype devices from emerging tech companies. 5 years after my graduation and disappearance, I had transformed from struggling student to multimillionaire. I had ownership stakes in dozens of companies across the country, having expanded my investment portfolio to include promising startups in fields ranging from biotechnology to sustainable energy. My holding company, Sullivan Innovations, had become a respected name in venture capital circles, known for thorough due diligence and founder-friendly terms. Throughout this period of extraordinary growth, I maintained my digital fortress. My public information was limited to what was legally required for business operations. I used different email addresses for different purposes, changed phone numbers regularly, and employed a private mail service to handle correspondence. I had no active social media presence under my real name and used secure messaging platforms for all sensitive communications. This carefully constructed barrier between my present success and past hurt remained intact until a business opportunity arose that would test its foundations. A mid-sized IT services company based in my hometown of Boston was struggling financially despite solid technical offerings. Their client list included several municipal governments and educational institutions, stable contracts that could provide recurring revenue with proper management. Most investment groups would have restructured the company, aggressively cutting staff and services to improve short-term profitability. I saw a different path, one that honored the company's 30-year legacy, while modernizing its operations and expanding its capabilities. I made an offer through Sullivan Innovations, deliberately maintaining the existing company name, Bradford Technology Services, and retaining most staff. The acquisition closed quietly with minimal publicity, beyond required financial disclosures. I installed a trusted lieutenant as on-site manager, while monitoring operations remotely. For 8 months, this arrangement worked perfectly, with Bradford's performance improving steadily under new leadership. Then came the quarterly review that would require my personal presence. As I booked my flight to Boston, I felt an unfamiliar tightness in my chest, anxiety about returning to the city where my family still lived, still unaware of the success I had built from their rejection. The Bradford Technology Services building stood on the outskirts of Boston's financial district, a modest 12-story structure with a recently renovated lobby. I arrived early for my scheduled meetings, wanting to observe operations without the formality of an announced visit. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that reflected my position but wouldn't draw undue attention, I entered through the main doors rather than the executive entrance. The reception area was bright and professional, with the company's blue and silver logo prominently displayed behind a curved desk. 2 receptionists managed a steady flow of visitors and calls. I stood back, observing the efficiency of their workflow and the general atmosphere. Employees nodded respectfully to each other as they passed through the security turnstiles, suggesting a collegial culture I was pleased to see had survived the acquisition. As I waited for an appropriate moment to approach the reception desk, the main doors opened again. A gray-haired man in his early 60s entered, his posture slightly stooped but still recognizable. My father. Time seemed to slow as my brain processed this impossible coincidence. He had aged considerably in the 5 years since I'd last seen him. Deep lines framed his mouth and eyes, and his formerly dark hair was now almost completely silver. He wore a suit that had once fit him well, but now hung slightly loose on his frame. I stepped behind a decorative pillar, heart pounding, as I watched him approach the reception desk. A primitive instinct urged me to flee, to preserve the carefully constructed separation between my past and present. But a stronger impulse kept me rooted in place, the need to understand why he was here in this building on this particular morning. "Good morning," he said to the younger receptionist. "I'm hoping you might be able to help me with something." "Of course, sir. How can I assist you today?" Her voice was professionally pleasant. "I'm looking for information about someone who might work here. My son, Aiden Sullivan. I've been trying to locate him for some time." The receptionist's expression remained neutral. "Let me check our directory, sir." "Sullivan, you said?" "Yes, Aiden Sullivan. He would be around 28 now. Computer science background." She typed briefly on her keyboard. "I'm not seeing anyone by that name in our current employee database. Let me check with Human Resources to be certain. May I ask your name, sir?" "Richard Sullivan. I'm his father." She picked up her phone and dialed an internal extension. "Hi, Melissa. I have a gentleman at reception looking for an employee named Aiden Sullivan. Yes, I checked the main directory. His father, Richard Sullivan. Yes, I'll hold." As the receptionist waited on hold, I made my decision. 5 years of silence had created a barrier that felt impenetrable, but seeing my father, older, smaller, somehow awakened something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but curiosity. Why now? Why here? I stepped forward, emerging from behind the pillar. "That won't be necessary," I said to the receptionist, who looked up in surprise. "I can handle this." My father turned at the sound of my voice, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as recognition dawned. "Aiden." His voice cracked slightly. "Is that really you?" We stood facing each other in the lobby, where neither of us had expected to meet. I was acutely aware of how much had changed, not just his aging, but my transformation. I stood taller now, carried myself with the confidence of success, rather than the defensive posture of someone expecting disappointment. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is unexpected." He seemed unable to form words for a moment, his eyes taking in my appearance, the quality of my suit, my composed demeanor. "I've been looking for you," he finally managed. "For years. You just disappeared." "I did," I acknowledged. "That was intentional." The receptionist was watching our exchange with professional discretion but obvious curiosity. "Would you like to use one of the conference rooms, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, clearly addressing me rather than my father. My father's eyes widened slightly at this deference. "Mr. Sullivan." "That would be helpful, Janice. Thank you." I gestured toward a small meeting room off the lobby. "Shall we?" My father followed me wordlessly into the room. Once the door closed behind us, he seemed to deflate slightly, sinking into one of the chairs around the polished table. "I found you through that technology magazine," he said without preamble. "The article only used your first name, but there was mention of your college and graduation year. I've been tracking down leads ever since." I remained standing, maintaining the subtle power dynamic. "And now you've found me. Why?" "Because you're my son." He stated it as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Because your mother cries on your birthday every year. Because Ethan asks about you constantly." I raised an eyebrow at this last claim. Does he? The brother who never noticed I was struggling, who took and took while I went without. He knows now. We all do. My father ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Ethan's life fell apart after you left. The car got repossessed. He couldn't hold a job. The money we gave him, it didn't help in the end. It just delayed the inevitable." "And that's supposed to make me feel better?" I asked quietly. "Number, it's just the truth." He looked up at me. "You seem to be doing well. Very well." I allowed myself a small, tight smile. "I am. No thanks to the support I didn't receive." My father glanced around the conference room, its expensive furnishings and technology, suggesting corporate success. "So you work here. You've done well for yourself in IT." The moment had arrived, the revelation I had never planned but now seemed inevitable. "I don't work here, Dad. I own this company, along with several others." The color drained from his face. "You own Bradford Technology, but they've been around for decades. I acquired it 8 months ago. It's one of the smaller companies in my portfolio." He stared at me, visibly processing this information. "My God, Aiden, how is that possible? You're only 28. 28 with 5 years of working every waking hour. 5 years of building something while expecting nothing from anyone else." I finally sat down across from him. 5 years of complete self-reliance, the skill you and Mom inadvertently taught me when you decided I wasn't worth supporting. My father flinched. "We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes that we've regretted every day since you left." "Regret doesn't change the past," I said. "It doesn't erase the nights I went hungry or the winters I spent cold. It doesn't undo the favoritism or the lies about being stretched thin while you found $22,000 for Ethan." "No, it doesn't," he agreed, his voice barely audible. "Nothing can change that. But family is still family, Aiden. We want to make amends. We want you back in our lives." I studied him for a long moment, noting the tremble in his hands, the genuine pain in his eyes. Part of me, the wounded college student who had been abandoned when he needed help, most wanted to dismiss him coldly, to have security escort him from the building. It would be a fitting symmetry to the rejection I had experienced. But the man I had become recognized that such an action would only continue the cycle of hurt. It wouldn't heal anything, not for him and certainly not for me. "I need to get to my meetings," I said finally. "I'm here to review quarterly operations." Hope flickered briefly in his eyes. "Could we talk later, maybe dinner? Your mother would?" "Not today," I interrupted. "I'm not ready for that. I need time to process this." He nodded, accepting this boundary. "Can I give you my number? A way to reach me, when if you're ready?" I hesitated, then took out my phone and created a new contact. He recited his number, which I noted had changed since I'd last known it. As we stood to leave, he made a motion as if to embrace me. then stopped himself, respecting the invisible barrier between us. "You look good, son," he said simply. "Successful, strong." "I am both of those things," I replied. "I made sure of it." I called the head of security from the conference room phone and asked him to escort my father out. As they left, I watched through the glass wall as my father walked away, his shoulders slightly more squared than when he had arrived, as if some burden had been fractionally lightened. I remained in the conference room alone, my carefully planned quarterly review forgotten, as I absorbed the seismic shift that had just occurred in my meticulously constructed life. In the weeks following the unexpected encounter with my father, I found myself in an unsettled state I hadn't experienced since my early days of independence. The satisfaction I had initially felt seeing my father's shock at my success, revealing my ownership of the company he had approached as a supplicant, faded quickly, leaving a hollow space I couldn't quite identify. My executive assistant noticed my distraction during meetings. My Chicago team commented on my unusual silence during video conferences. Even Marcus, who had become my closest friend, remarked on my altered demeanor when we met for our regular chess match at my penthouse. "You've been somewhere else for weeks," he observed, capturing my bishop with a precise move I should have anticipated. "Whatever it is, it's affecting your game, and knowing you probably your sleep too." I shared the bare outlines of the encounter, expecting the validation of my righteous distance that most friends offer in such situations. Instead, Marcus surprised me with his response. "5 years is a long time to carry anger, Aiden. Not saying it isn't justified at Island, but at some point you have to ask yourself who that anger is serving now." His words echoed in my mind during the 3 a.m. wakefulness that had indeed returned to my nights. Who was my continued estrangement serving the empire I had built initially, fueled by the need to prove my worth, had become self-sustaining? My success was undeniable, visible in concrete forms from corporate balance sheets to my penthouse view. The point had been made whether my family acknowledged it or not. During my next session with Dr. Franklin, who had replaced Dr. Chen when I moved to Chicago, I explored these conflicted feelings. "It sounds like you expected the confrontation to be more satisfying than it was," she observed. "Why do you think that is?" "Because nothing changed," I replied after consideration. "He's still the father who chose my brother over me. I'm still the son who had to fend for himself. All my success doesn't alter that fundamental betrayal." "True," she agreed. "But perhaps what needs to change isn't the past, but how you carry it forward." 2 days later, a letter arrived at my private mail service, handwritten on heavy stationery, my name and the address of my holding company carefully printed on the envelope. My father had found a way to reach me again. I almost discarded it unopened, but found myself breaking the seal, instead extracting 3 densely written pages. "Dear Aiden asterisk. I've started this letter a dozen times since seeing you at Bradford Technologies. Each attempt felt inadequate to address the magnitude of our failures as your parents and the depth of hurt we caused. Let me begin with the clearest truth. We were wrong. Fundamentally, inexcusably wrong in how we treated you compared to your brother. There is no justification that makes it acceptable, no explanation that undoes the harm. We told ourselves stories that seemed to make sense at the time, that you were self-sufficient, that you didn't need our help the way Ethan did, that your intelligence would ensure your success regardless of obstacles. These were comfortable fictions that allowed us to direct our resources toward your brother without confronting our own favoritism. When you asked for help with rent, we had the means to assist you. We chose not to. When we paid off Ethan's debt, we had the opportunity to reflect on our disparate treatment of our sons. We chose not to. These were active choices that reflected deeply flawed priorities, not the financial limitations we claimed. Seeing you at Bradford successful beyond anything we could have imagined, I felt immense pride alongside crushing shame. Pride in what you've accomplished through your own brilliance and determination. Shame in knowing we contributed nothing to that success, except perhaps the adversity that fueled your drive. Your mother and I have spent 5 years reflecting on our failures. Ethan, too, has come to recognize the inequity of his privileged position in our family. His subsequent struggles, which I mentioned during our meeting, are not shared to engender sympathy, but to illustrate that our approach failed both our sons in different ways. Asterisk. We don't expect forgiveness. We haven't earned it. But we hope for the possibility of building something new, not a restoration of what was, which was fundamentally flawed, but perhaps a more honest relationship based on who we all are now. Asterisk. If you're willing, we would welcome any form of contact you might consider. A call, an email, another meeting on your terms and timeline. Asterisk. With deepest regret and enduring love, asterisk, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, searching for the defensive justifications or subtle manipulations I expected. Finding none, I was left with the uncomfortable recognition of its apparent sincerity. My curiosity about my family's current circumstances led me to do something I had avoided for 5 years. I researched them. Through public records and social media, I pieced together the outline of their lives since my departure. My parents still lived in the same house, though property records showed they had refinanced twice, suggesting financial strain. My father had retired earlier than planned from his insurance company position. My mother continued teaching but had reduced to part-time hours. Ethan's digital footprint showed a series of short-term jobs, a brief marriage that ended in divorce, and a recent return to community college. Their apparent financial struggles triggered a complex emotion I hadn't anticipated: concern. Despite everything, some primal connection remained, some vestigial sense of family that 5 years of determined independence hadn't completely severed. After 2 weeks of deliberation, I sent a brief email to the address my father had included in his letter, suggesting coffee at a neutral location, a cafe near the Boston Public Garden. I specified a time 3 weeks in the future, giving myself the option to reconsider. The morning of our scheduled meeting, I dressed carefully in casual clothes rather than my usual business attire: jeans and a sweater that revealed nothing about my financial status. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered privacy while allowing me to observe the entrance. My parents arrived together 5 minutes before the appointed time. They moved more slowly than I remembered, my mother leaning slightly on my father's arm as they navigated between tables. They hadn't seen me yet, and I had a moment to observe them unnoticed. The additional gray in my mother's hair, the reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, the careful way my father scanned the room. When our eyes met, my mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediately welling. My father gently guided her forward, his own expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had, raw, honest, painful, but ultimately productive. They acknowledged the favoritism that had defined our family dynamic, offered no excuses for their failures, and expressed genuine remorse that seemed to go beyond guilt to true understanding of the harm caused. "We don't expect you to forget what happened," my mother said at one point, her voice steady despite her tears. "We just hope you might consider allowing us some small place in your life going forward. On your terms," my father added quickly, "whatever boundaries you need." I made no promises that day, but I didn't close the door either. We agreed to proceed slowly with clear expectations and defined limits. I was not rejoining family holidays or weekly dinners, but I would accept occasional communication and consider further meetings depending on how things progressed. As I rebuilt this cautious connection with my parents, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The desperate college student counting pennies for ramen had become a successful entrepreneur with resources beyond what he could once have imagined. The hurt and anger that had fueled my initial drive had served their purpose, but had become increasingly heavy baggage to carry. 6 months after that first coffee meeting, I established the Sullivan Opportunity Fund, a scholarship program specifically designed for students facing financial hardship during their education. The application process was simple, focusing on need rather than academic achievements, and the support covered not just tuition but living expenses, ensuring recipients could focus on their studies without the crushing stress I had experienced. I found unexpected fulfillment in reading the applications and personal stories of students who reminded me of my younger self. Each quarter, I personally notified the selected recipients, remembering the relief I had felt when Professor Winters had secured that emergency grant for me years earlier. My relationship with my family continued to evolve cautiously. We established a monthly video call, structured and time-limited at first, gradually becoming more natural. I met with Ethan separately, finding him humbled by his experiences and genuinely regretful of his role in our family's dysfunction. I was oblivious, he admitted during our first meeting. I took everything for granted while you struggled. I'm sorry, man. Truly sorry. The following Christmas, 6 years after I had walked away from my family, I accepted an invitation to dinner at my parents' home. It was neither the strained performance of my childhood nor a magical restoration of what had never truly existed. Instead, it was something new, tentative, imperfect, but honest. Throughout this gradual reconnection, I maintained the boundaries that protected my well-being. I shared selective information about my business success, but kept many details private. I limited the frequency and duration of contact. I continued my therapy sessions, processing each interaction and ensuring I wasn't slipping back into old, unhealthy patterns of seeking approval or acceptance. Most importantly, I recognized that while family connections might enhance my life, they no longer defined it. I had built a chosen family of loyal friends, trusted colleagues, and mentors who valued me for exactly who I was. My sense of worth no longer depended on external validation, parental or otherwise. The empire I had built continued to thrive and expand, but my perspective on its purpose evolved. What had begun as a vehicle for proving my value became a platform for creating positive impact. I implemented generous employee benefits, prioritized ethical business practices, and directed significant resources toward educational initiatives and technology access programs for underserved communities. Looking back on the desperate college student I once was, I recognize both his pain and his resilience. The journey from that point to my current success taught me lessons no university course could provide about self-reliance, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting, about the power of redirecting pain toward purposeful action rather than destruction. Most profound was the realization that true success isn't measured by bank accounts or business acquisitions, but by the freedom to define your own path forward. For me, that meant creating a life of purpose, surrounding myself with genuine connections, and eventually finding the strength to engage with my past without being controlled by it. If you're watching this and struggling with family wounds of your own, know that your path to healing is uniquely yours. Some relationships can be carefully rebuilt with proper boundaries. Others are better left behind. The most important relationship to repair is the one with yourself. Have you experienced family favoritism or had to create success entirely on your own? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe if this resonated with you, and hit that like button if you've found your own way to turn pain into power. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to success, to something I never expected to find: peace.